preparing to live stream. Okay. You'll start very soon. It's loading to YouTube Live right now. All right. Still preparing. Done redirecting YouTube. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you. Oh, wait, sorry. My YouTube is not muted. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks, y'all, for taking your Monday evening to join us today at our talk with Celia with Design Buddies. I'm Grace. I founded Design Buddies back in April just to make some design friends. Been super excited to see almost 12,000 buddies join. And Design Buddies, if you guys are new to Design Buddies, it's an inclusive design community. We have a lot of free resource talks like this. And how this talk would go is that we'll hand it off to Pat after this to introduce Celia, and then she will give a presentation and we'll follow up with the Q&A. For the Q&A, we'll alternate between we unmuting you guys to ask a question, or we ask questions in the chat. So you're welcome to ask questions in any format you prefer. And we'll end with a group photo and a wave for our Instagram story. And with that, I'll leave it to Pat.
Hey everyone, I'm Pat. I'm the Design Buddies book club leader, and I want to introduce Celia Hoden. She is an expert and independent consultant in games user experience and applied cognitive science. She has a PhD in psychology from the University of Paris, Sorbonne. I probably butchered that, but
no, you did great.
And is the author of The Gamer's Brain. This book in particular, I have it right here. And how neuroscience and UX can impact video game design, and a newly released The Psychology of Video Game. She's also the GDC Summit Chair and advisor for the GDC UX Summit. Previously, she was a part of Ubisoft Montreal, LucasArts, and Epic Games, contributing to more than 10 years of user experience. Her latest endeavor is Ethical Games, an initiative with academics and game developers to develop a code of ethics for the video game industry. And thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super excited. Is it my turn now?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. So hello, everyone. I hope that you are safe and doing well because it's complicated times. I'm going to share my screen and my PowerPoint, and we're going to start. So for those who knows me already, I'm probably going to you know already what I'm going to talk about, but I need to make sure that everybody knows what this is all about, because I know that some people are not from the game industry. So hopefully I can make it interesting for everyone. Let's see how that goes. So the idea here is to talk about how we have a UX approach in video games, and to talk a little bit about ethics. All right. For those who don't know really much about video games are really interesting because they are an interactive art form. There's a lot of different video games, and this is one of my favorite games in recent years. I really love that game. It's called Inside, and it's really interesting how you get into a different world when you play a game. And there's a lot of different games and different genre and different narrative and different ambience and all of that. But what's a bit different from a video game than, let's say, a movie is that if there's no input from the players, you can't really see what's going on in the game. So we need to understand a little bit how people interact with the game so that people can actually enjoy the art of video games. So video games is a little bit at the, I would say, the crossroads between movies for the narrative and all the techniques that we use in games, and technology. And that's the reason why we need a lot of actually understanding human factor psychology and how people interact with things. Because again, if people need to interact with the game and understand what's going on to unfold what's happening in the game. So it's really, really important to have a UX mindset in the video game industry. Game user experience is really about making sure what the developers, and when I say developer here, I mean anyone participating into developing a game. So programmers, but artists, designers, QA people, everybody participating to making a game, they have a specific mental model of representation of what they want to accomplish with the game, and they have to put all that and all their ideas into a system. So the game engine that we're using, and so it's already a little bit different from what they had in mind, because we have a lot of constraints, and also we don't have infinite time or money. And then once we ship the game, the players, they're gonna interact with the game, and they're going to make up their own mental model of what they believe the game is all about, only through their interaction with the system image. The system image, it's everything that players can perceive and interact with. So it's going to be the UI, but it's everything else as well. It's art, it's music, it's design, it's all of that. And the idea of game user experience is to align those two things, making sure that the players are going to experience what the developers wanted for them. So it's really important to understand what this is about. And because experiencing a video game happens in people's minds, we need to start with how the mind works. So for those of you who are very familiar with UX design and with human factor psychology, this is going to be very well known, but I'm going to try to go fast so we can really tackle the ethics part. This is overall how it looks like when the brain and when we interface with the environment and we process information and learn. It always starts with an input. It starts with our senses. We just gather what's going on around us through our senses, and we have way more than 5. We can sense temperature, for example. We sense many, many things. And so that process is called perception. And then through the things we perceive, we're going to process the information. And at the end of the day, we're going to hopefully memorize new things. And when that happens, it's changing physically something in our brain. Memory is about synaptic modifications. Synapses are connections between neurons. And whatever we do, like learn, play a video game, listening to me right now, it is modifying our brains. This is how it works. And this is how we can adjust to our environment that is changing all the time. And between perception and a change in our brain, there's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of factors that is going to impact the quality of learning, such as attention. Attention is a big factor. We know that if we pay attention more to something, we learn better. But there are other factors, there are also biological factors, physiological factors, such as if someone has drunk too much coffee, it's going to be difficult to stay focused. Or if you're like sleepy because it's the end of the day or super early where you are, it's going to be harder for you to follow. But there's also other factors such as motivation and emotion. I'm going to focus more on attention just to show you a few examples of how to take into this to take these elements into account, and most specifically the brain limitations that we have. So keep in mind this is extremely simplified, but I'm going to give you one example of one limitation from each: perception, memory, and attention, and show you how we overcame that in Fortnite, for example. So first of all, take a look at this, and you can insert in the chat if you want. Tell me what you perceive in this image. And typically when I do that, I oftentimes have a lot of gamers or people from the game industry. And I have like a small group of people, let's say 30% of my audience, that immediately say, oh, this is Street Fighter characters. They immediately see that in this image. And if you recognize that, good job. If you didn't, it's okay, because it means that you have either you don't really know that game, or you don't have a strong connection with that game. And that's all right, because perception is subjective, and this is what this is telling. On top of that, of course, if you're colorblind, it's like about 8% of the male population, you are excluded from this game. And I apologize for that. It's a good reminder for everyone to never convey things through colors only, and to always think about how your design is excluding some people. Okay, so perception is subjective. That's a big problem when you make a game and a lot of things, because we need people to perceive things the way we intended. And as a problem, if people don't perceive it the way we intended, and we can never be 100% sure that they're going to perceive it the way we wanted, because perception is subjective. So we can't anticipate everything. So we test. This is one of the things that we do. We test icons. We test character design. We also sometimes test sound design. We can test environment design. Here's an example of one of the icons that we tested in Fortnite. So maybe into the chat, you can folks try to guess what this was representing back in 2013. So I'm just going to let you a few seconds to figure it out. So this represented the traps in Fortnite. For those who haven't played Fortnite, Fortnite is a building game, and you also combat and shoot and do a lot of stuff, but you can build traps, and traps is a very big component in Fortnite. And this is the icon showing where your traps are and what traps you can craft in Fortnite. But a lot of the players, when we invited them and asked them what was this, they did not recognize it as the icon for trap, even though they played the game a little bit. So we iterated that icon, and we changed it into an archetype of a trap. So this is a bear trap. There are no bear traps whatsoever in Fortnite, but as soon as we used that icon, it was really stereotypical, and people understood immediately what it meant. So it's really important to test all that. And if you have a game or a product that you want to ship across different territories, you have to be careful, because perception is also tied to culture. And so what means something to you might not mean the same thing to another culture. It's also tied to generations. So like the young generation have no idea the first time that they see the save icon, what it represents. But older generation like me, we interacted with the floppy disks, so we already have a mental representation of it. But of course, you learn it and then you can recognize it, but it means that if you never interacted with the floppy disk, you need to learn this icon. So perception is subjective. It's really, really important, first of all, to know well who are your users, and second of all, to test to verify that things are going well. Now memory, I'm just going to do very quickly because I want to go fast. Try to visualize in your mind the thinker. So it's a pretty iconic, not everybody knows it, but it's a pretty iconic sculpture from the French sculptor Auguste Rodin. Try to remember exactly his posture. So it's the dude who's just like trying to think very hard. And so he has a specific posture, and he has like arms laying on his legs or legs. So try to remember exactly what is its posture. And now I'm going to show you the answer. So most people remember that he has the right arm on the left leg, or vice versa. Sometimes people say it's on the same side, but he actually has both arms on the left side. And it's very, very, very rare that people remember that more specifically. And the reason is it's because memory is fallible. We have an approximate memory of things. We don't remember things accurately. We don't take pictures or recordings of what's going on around us and store it somewhere, and then we get it back, when we have to memorize, to recover things accurately. So we are losing accuracy as the time passes, and also we forget a bunch of stuff. So this is really important. Perception is subjective, and it's a construct of the mind, and memory is a reconstruction. So memory is fallible, and we don't want really to rely too much on people's memory for any product, because we never know what people are going to forget, and for what they remember, is it going to be really, really accurate or not? So in games, or specifically like in a game like Fortnite, it's very systemic. There's a lot of things to remember. Some games have less information to remember, but in a game like Fortnite, there's a lot of stuff to remember. So that's typically the reason why we have the heads up day. So with the HUD, so all the information on screen that gives away information at all times for players, so they don't have to remember it. Or whenever players are close to a searchable object, we pop up in the UI the key that they need to press. They don't have to remember that information. Or if they want to craft something, they don't have to remember what's the name of the thing they want to craft, what are the ingredients that they need. They can just pin the recipe on their HUD, so that they can really focus on their objective and not having to remember a bunch of stuff. So that's something that we need to always remember, is to reduce the memory load for our users. And this is one of the ways we do that in games. And lastly, we're going to play a little, do a little magic trick. I'm going to show you some cards, and I would like you to choose one and try to remember it as accurately as you can. And it's going to go fairly fast. So pick one and try to remember it as accurately as possible. All right. I bet I can guess which card you picked and make it disappear. Ta-da! So I hope it worked. It's always tricky online. But if it worked and you don't know what happened here, I actually changed all the cards. So it's very lousy magic trick. I'm sorry, I'm not a magician. But this is what magicians do. They play around with our attention. Because we don't have very good attentional resources. This particular thing is called misdirection of attention. But in psychology, this phenomenon has a very specific name. It's called change blindness. We're known to not paying a lot of attention or being aware of big changes from one visual scene to the next when we're focused on one element. Because our attention resources are not good. We're not scanning everything very accurately. We're focused on one thing and we filter out the rest. And so sometimes big changes, we don't see it. So our attentional resources are very scarce. And in video games, we challenge that a lot most of the time. But in a game like Fortnite, we don't want to overwhelm players too much, especially in the beginning of the game, as players are learning a lot of stuff, which is impacting your attentional resources a lot. The more something is familiar, the less you need to pay attention, and so you can pay attention to something else. But as you start learning a new game, it requires a lot of your attentional resources. So this is when we really want to make sure it's not too much information. So for example, in Fortnite, as you play the game in save the world mode, there's enemies popping and it's already requiring your attention, but the enemies are behind a wall, so you're not going to be overwhelmed with too much stuff at the beginning. You can actually take your time. So these are the things we need to figure out when we make a game and not overwhelm players' attention too much. So these, very quickly, perception is subjective, attentional resources are scarce, and memory is fallible. Now, one of the main difference between a game and a tool in terms of UX is in a tool, we want to remove all the frustrations so that users can accomplish their goals. In a game, you don't interact with the game to accomplish goals. The goal is to interact with the game. So we actually introduce some challenges because this is part of the fun. So some games going to challenge perception. A game like Monument Valley challenges perception. A lot of games challenge attention, like action games challenge attention, and some games also challenge memory. So we are going to keep some challenges here, but we want to remove all the frustrations that are not by design. So that's the big difference between the UX in video games and UX of tools, for example. So very quickly, this is the game UX framework that I'm using in the game industry. So we have two main parts. We have usability. It's the ability of the game to be used. It's very similar from the game that, again, UX design and UX of tools in general. But again, in games, if a game is usable, it's not enough because a game can be usable, easy to use and to understand, but not fun and boring. So we really need to ensure that the game is going to be engaging. So very quickly, usability, we use pretty much the same heuristics than in any other disciplines. The big difference is in the game industry, we have our own vernacular and we use our own terms. So this is this is not my heuristic, but these are more guidelines or common vocabulary. So we can make sure that we talk about the same thing. So signs and feedback would be the equivalent of making sure that you have a visibility of system status in the Norman Nielsen guidelines or Jacob Nielsen heuristics. So I hope all of you are designers or UX, and you know about UX, so it's not, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, the idea is here making sure that people understand what they need to do. That's the signs. What can they do in the game? And as they do an input, like either with the keyboard or the controller or on the tab on their phone, they have feedback from the system telling them if they did is correct, is it efficient, not efficient. So it's a lot around this and making sure these are clear, et cetera, et cetera. The other part that I said is really critical in games is the engagement part, because we are not playing a game if it's not fun. That's the whole point of engaging with a game, is to be engaged with it. It's not a means to an end. So this is really, really critical for video games. We care about three main things, I would say: motivation, emotion, and what we call a game flow. So motivation is really at the center of what we need to focus on to make sure a game is going to be fun and engaging. Um, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit very quickly, but emotion and game flow are here to support motivation. So emotion is what are the emotions that you feel as you play the game, or as you interact with a system. And game flow is more specific to games. It's about making sure like players are really concentrated. The game is not too easy, not too hard, and they can really be fully in the game and they feel that they're in the flow as they play. But it's mainly about motivation. Really care about player motivation. This is really key to ensure that they want to keep playing, because you don't do something if you're not motivated. And there's two main types of motivation in humans that we look into. There are more, but to simplify, there's two main. You have extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is you do something to get something else. So in games, it will be you accomplish a mission to get a reward, and with this reward, you know you're going to be able to do something else. So games really need to ensure that they have clear goals and clear rewards associated to these goals. Intrinsic motivation is also very, very important. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to show you the slide for extrinsic motivation. So, clear goals and rewards associated to these goals. And intrinsic motivation, it's we know that activities that are intrinsically motivated, so the ones that you do because you just love doing them, it's not in order to gain something else, that it's extrinsic to the task. We know that these activities are the activities that are more intrinsically motivated are the ones that are satisfying our needs, human needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness. I know I'm covering a lot of stuff in a very fast way, but just to give you an overview of what we care about for games. So competence is really important. It's about a sense of progression. We need to feel that we're progressing in an activity that we're doing, that we're getting more skillful, and we are mastering it, because otherwise we don't really want to keep doing it. So it's really important, like in games, that players feel that they're progressing and they have the tools to control and to understand what's going on. And it's okay to die in a game, but if you don't know why you died and you can get better at it, this is when it starts to be boring. Autonomy is being able to express yourself mostly. So, of course, games where you can choose your avatar, choose your dance moves, or also games that give you a lot of freedom. Games like we call shoot, what's the name? Sandbox. I went blank from sandbox games like Minecraft or GTA are examples when you have a lot of freedom and you can a little bit not do everything you want, but you can do a lot of stuff, or games where you can solve problems in different ways. So these are more motivating when you can actually have meaningful choices. And last but not least is relatedness. As human beings, we care a lot about relationship. And so games where you have cooperation or competition are more interesting because we love to play with others. So these are the things that we look into when we make a game. And we always try to place the player in a situation where they need to solve something. They need to solve a challenge. I hear they need to get out of the cave. This is when we actually teach players to build in Fortnite. They need to build stairs to get out of here. So it's really when we onboard players, we always try to put them in a situation where there's something they need to solve for, and they have a challenge, and mastering a new ability or a new weapon or item is the way to solve for the challenge. So here we are. This is like overall the framework that I'm using, and it's here to guide us along the way to ensure that we can offer that to our players. And if it's not working, we can use this to try to find out where the problem is coming from. And then we test and we iterate. So I'm just going to show you an example Okay, I'm a bit over, but we didn't start at 6, so I think I'm good. So here's an example of how we iterate when we have a problem. So here is in Fortnite, we at some point we had problems because players found, so it was more in the save the world part of the game, so where you have more RPG mechanics when you really have to evolve in your game. Some players at some point were really complaining that it was taking too long to harvest ingredients to then craft something that was interesting for their level. Let's say they are level 10, they need to gather way more resources to craft something really interesting for their level. But so when we have this problem, we try to figure out why this is happening. And because players' perception is subjective, it's not necessarily coming from the design itself. It might be coming from something else in the game. And this is one of the hypotheses that I had is like in the game, we have what we call weak points. And players are supposed to aim at the weak point to harvest faster. But this is what we were observing when we were testing the game. So this is coming from a playtest session. And players are not aiming at the thing. So that's a problem because if players are not using it, they're actually going to harvest it's going to take them way longer to harvest anything in Fortnite, because if you aim at this, you harvest much faster something. And when I was asking players, what is this? They were telling me, I don't know. So I thought, okay, they don't really see it because it's not really sticking out. So artists iterated on it. They made it bigger, blue, pulsing inward, looking like a target. And so we thought, okay, this is good. So let's see what that does. Didn't work. So this is when we're like, why are they still not aiming at that thing? So when I was asking players at that moment, what is this? They were telling me something like, oh, that's the symbol telling me I'm targeting this element. So now they could perceive it better, but it was still not really telling players what to do with it. And so believe it or not, this was not sold in the UI, it was actually sold in the design. So in Fortnite, in Save the World, you have a skill tree, so you can earn new abilities. And they removed the weak point from the beginning of the game, and you had to unlock it in the skill tree. So a lot of text, and of course, players don't read. We don't read, like users don't read. Don't don't rely on reading, but you have a little video that players skip, but at least there's a lot of fluff around it. And after we did that, way more players were finally using the weak points. Hooray! So this is a very narrow example of how we iterate on something that might look super like a detail, but it was impacting a lot the experience of players. All right, so after this really rushed version of how we do UX in games and what does it mean and how we iterate, I wanted to talk about ethics, because we know that there's no such thing as a neutral design. We just saw it with the weak point, depending on how it was designed and how it's introduced to players, they are going to be influenced differently, and either they're going to aim at it or not aim at it. So we know that a design is going to influence people. It can also manipulate emotion, but it's never neutral. So we need to understand a little bit how a design can in fact affect people, and especially around, so we talked about limitations in terms of perception, attention, memory. But we also have tons of cognitive biases, as shown in this codex. The idea is not for you to look at them all, but just for you to feel overwhelmed by all the biases that we have. And we also need to make sure that the design that we're doing is not negatively impacting users. So it's really important to not fall into what we call dark patterns. So a dark pattern is a design that's intentionally deceiving for the benefit of the company at the expense of the users. So here's an example of a dark pattern, and to me, it's really anti-UX because in UX we care about, we're doing human-centered design, and we care about the best interests of the humans. So yes, we need to take into account the business decisions, and the object, the system, the video game has to make revenues enough so that we can sustain the activity for sure. But we never want to place the business before the humans. This is never something that we want to do. We care about ethics and inclusion and all that. So here's an example of a dark pattern. Amazon has a few of these. Because I am punching up because Amazon have a lot of money. So let's talk about them. At some point, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but you were placing stuff in your cart, and then you want to check out, and you would see that screen with a big orange button, get started. And most people, we don't read, so we're like, yeah, we're busy. I want to get started and check out. But actually, if you click on this big orange button, it's getting you started to subscribing to Amazon Prime. If you don't want to subscribe to Amazon Prime, you actually need to click on that tiny link that is not really obvious. And because attention is scarce, we know that most people are not going to pay attention to this, and they're going to click on the big orange button. And a large proportion of people are likely going to click on this, subscribe to Amazon Prime without even noticing, and really they did not want to do that. And of course, after a month, you start to pay for it, and it might take you a while to realize what's going on. So this is a dark pattern. This is intentionally deceiving people. Most people are not going to pay attention to it, and it's for the best benefit. The benefit is more for the company than for the users in this case. So that's a clear dark pattern. There's a lot of different types of dark patterns. Sometimes they're more on the fence. It's more like, it's not a clear dark pattern because nothing is really hidden, but we're influencing people to stay longer or to buy. So here are a few examples of how we use, some people use cognitive biases to influence people in a way that is more detrimental to the users and more beneficial to the company. So scarcity is when you say, well, we don't have any more of this. So we saw that during the pandemic. I don't know if it was the case in your country, your city. Here where I live in California, at some point there was no toilet paper. And so I just all of a sudden, everybody wants toilet paper because there's scarcity of toilet paper. So we know that when we know that there's not much of something, it creates a need to have it. And so sometimes companies do that. They pretend that it's soon gone, there's one left. Sometimes it's true, and sometimes they actually really, it's not true, and they just try to influence you to buy. This goes very well with the fear of missing out, because we fear to miss out on something that is scarce. But any stuff, when we say, oh, well, we just went through Black Friday in the US, Black Friday is a big example of that. It's only today, and you have to buy it today, otherwise you're going to miss out on these incredible discounts. So that's influencing us to buy something that maybe we would not have bought. Loss aversion is an example of that. We know that humans are more averse to loss than they are to gains. So it's harder for us to accept a loss rather than saying that we're missing on the gain. So loss aversion would be an example in this Snapchat streak. If you have a streak, so you snap with a friend, and every day, the streak goes on. But if one day you're not replying to your friend, you're going to lose the streak. And so that's encouraging you to keep going, even though you did not necessarily want to chat with your friend at that day. So this is playing on the loss aversion. Once we have something big, we don't want to lose it, even though it doesn't mean much, and we should not care about these things. And one last example is the anchoring effect. So we always compare things to one another. And when we have an anchor, so for example, in sales, you will have an anchor like a big number, like $49. And then you have the strike through and it says, now it's $12. So it's really making you compare the new price to the prior price. And that makes people getting influenced, and sometimes they're going to buy something when there's a big gap between the original price, the anchor, and the today's price. Sometimes the anchor is just fabricated just to make you feel that it's a huge discount and you're making a great deal. So we know that these things influence people. It's not necessarily a straight dark pattern because things are not necessarily hidden from people, but still it is influencing users to do something that is not necessarily to their benefit, and is definitely to the benefit of the company. So this is when we need to be careful with that, and for anything, but in games we start to see that, and it's a lot around emotional tricks. So in games, it's things that don't have any more lives. You need to buy coins to get more lives, or you need to attend to a character or to something, otherwise it's gonna die. So there's a lot of pressure sometimes, or you have an event and it's only today or only in a week, and if you're not there, you're never gonna see it again. Or this is this awesome skin and you can only have it for that period of time, and if you're not there, you're not having it. So these are creating some tensions, and sometimes it makes sense in the gameplay. So of course, a game like Tamagotchi, it's the whole gameplay to pretend that you're taking care of a living being. So it doesn't make sense if you remove it. But we can also think about how much pressure we want to put on. We can say, well, if you don't interact with it every 5 minutes, then it dies. And it's pretty intense. But we can say, well, if we don't interact with it every 3 days, then it dies. It gives more autonomy to players, and we can definitely try to think, what is the good line to not cross. So there's a lot of things that we need to think about that are, sometimes the line is not really easy to define. So the thing that we can do in video games, I typically ask game developers to try to identify shady practices, because sometimes we just copy, a thing that was on another game. We don't really think about it, and we don't really think about the pressure and the influence it can create in some players, especially the younger ones. So we try to identify these things and reconsider, especially if we have young players, because the part of the brain that is helping control our impulses is the prefrontal cortex. So that's the part of your brain. This is the last part of the brain to mature, and it takes sometimes up to 25 years of age to completely mature, which means that before that, it's going to be harder for teenagers and even harder for children to control impulses. And so it's harder for them to get over that sort of pressures. So guilt tripping, paying to remove discomfort, loot boxes tied to monetization. So loot boxes are a form of variable rewards. Variable rewards are really used a lot in games. Any game that is using a draw of cards or a throw of dice is using variable rewards. But then you have games with loot boxes. So it's when you're going to have a surprise item, but this is tied to monetization. So in order to get more loot boxes, you either need to play more time, or you need to buy the currency in game with real money. So this is when it starts to look more like gambling, and it stops to look like normal variables that we love in games, like in a game like Mario Kart, when you hit the interrogation box, you don't know what you're gonna get, and that's fun because we love to not know, and that's adding some randomness is always very interesting in games. So the problem here is when we link it to monetization, as a means to pressure the player into buying more stuff. Fear of missing out, loss aversion, autoplay. So we see that a lot with Netflix or YouTube. As the next video is playing, we see that in games, also in multiplayer games. You just play it again, and sometimes they put you in autoplay. You have like 20 seconds, and you have the countdown. And if you don't do anything, you're just going to be automatically rematched in another game. So all these things can put pressure on players, and we need to really look into these, because it's really important if we care about a UX approach to think about humans first. And the last elements that I put at the bottom, these are tied to what we call the attention economy. So that's quite trendy today. It's anything that, again, it's putting some pressure to the user to interact longer or more with a system. So fear of missing out, you have to come back that day because otherwise you're missing on something. Loss aversion, if you're not coming back tomorrow, you're going to lose it. Or if you're not interacting with the system tomorrow, you lose something. Autoplay, it would keep you in the system just because if you don't do anything, something happens. Like, oh yeah, well, now that I'm rematched, I'm going to stick around and play. So all of that, we need to think about it because money is precious. It's precious for people, but time is precious as well. So we want to make sure that when you play a game, of course, it's entertainment. So you play a game to spend time getting entertained. But what I care about as a UX professional is making sure that it's worth their time and they really want to be there in the game, and instead of coming here because they want to get something a bit external from just hanging around in the game. So sometimes, it's with entertainment, it's a bit tricky to find the line because people are here to get entertained. So it's very different than from tools where you use something in order to get something else. And yes, I'm guilty tripping you with the little cat because we know that we care about cats and this one is cute, so we don't want to disappoint the cat. And lastly, sometimes it's not easy to differentiate what is a dark pattern from good UX. So here's an example. It's an old screenshot from World of Warcraft. It's a great game. So MMORPG. So it's a role-playing game with a lot of players online. And you grow a character. So this is, for example, a character. It takes, weeks, sometimes months to level up your character. And if you want to delete your character in World of Warcraft, back then, so you have a confirmation screen. Are you sure you want to delete the character? But on top of that, they ask you to type in delete. So here you can say, well, this looks like a dark pattern because they're adding some friction for you to not delete your character. And you can say, well, yeah, it's not to the benefit of the company, Blizzard, to have players deleting characters because sometimes it means that they don't want to play the game anymore. But this is actually what we call error prevention in UX. It's really important. And when we having like UX guidelines to ensure that we're going to prevent costly errors from happening, just like if you delete something or you close down your work on Word or whatever, and you didn't save, it's really annoying. So sometimes we're going to ask you, are you sure? Or we're going to use stuff like autosave to prevent errors from happening. And here it is an example of error prevention because it takes a lot of time to develop a character. And we want to make sure that you're not deleting your character by mistake because it's a very costly error to make. So to me, as soon as you see a win-win situation, yes, it's good for Blizzard that players don't delete characters, but it's also good for players to not delete a character by mistake. Now, it would become a dark pattern if the character was crying behind the screen saying, are you sure you want to delete me? That would be a dark pattern because this is when you use guilt tripping to prevent players from deleting. So sometimes, it's a fine line. This is the reason why in games it's sometimes complicated to talk about these things. But overall, a UX approach is incompatible with the use of dark patterns. Again, we're here to talk about humans first. Of course, it has to be a win-win situation. A game or whatever it is needs to make revenue to survive. But we never want to place the business before the benefit of players. So I started an initiative where the other people from the game industry is called ethicalgames.org, where we try to figure out what a code of ethics would look like in the game industry. Again, all these fine lines, where are there and how we can improve ethics in the industry. And it's not just ethics for players, it's also ethics for workers in the game industry. So inclusion, avoid crunching situations, and like overtime, stuff like that. Okay, so keep in mind that the brain is very good at making sense of the world with very little information. This is how we survived the predators. But today, our environment is way more complex that when we had to survive the savannah, and our brain is pretty much the same. And so sometimes we have a tendency to jump to conclusions, and this is the wrong conclusion. And this is what we call biases. So we have to be careful with that. And this is the reason why UX is so important, so we can understand what's going on in people's minds, so we can make sure to offer them the best experience possible. And that includes ethics and inclusion considerations. All right, that was fast, was mainly on time. So thanks so much for your attention. And I'm going to answer 2 questions. And here are the books. So The Gamer's Brain is a very professional book. So it's really talking about UX in the game industry. So it talks about cognitive science and the UX framework that I'm using. The Psychology of Video Games is a game for it's a book for everyone. It's a very short book. It's just to explain how games are made and what are the research on games, because a lot of people hate games or think that games are not good. So I'm doing a little digest of all the research on games. All right, that's it. So now I'm going to answer your questions.
Oh, thank you so much. That was amazing. We'll be alternating. I love how you shared like the ethics and as well as both usability and ways to engage gamers. And yeah, so make sure to stay till the end because you'll do a group photo for Instagram story and for our social media as well. And I also have a surprise for you, Celia, at the end. So
me,
yeah.
Lots of surprises. You know that like surprises are good for sustaining engagements, right?
Of course.
You're tricking me right now.
So we'll alternate between calling on people and Pat will be reading off questions from the chat. So we're trying to get to as many as we can with our next 10 minutes here. So we'll go in order, the order that appears for me. Yijin, I'll unmute you so you can ask your question.
Hey, Celia, thank you again so much. This was all super educational. I actually had a question about design ethics. So if somebody recognizes like shady practices or dark patterns in their company, how do you recommend that they bring that up in a way that not only encourages, but also persuades like higher level executives?
Yeah, that's a great question because this is often the case that a lot of people put pressure on UX professionals and UX professionals don't always make decisions. So it's really hard. So it depends on the UX maturity at the company. So if the company has company values, then it's easier because then you can say, well, what we're doing here is against this company value. So how are you going to explain that? So that can help people to take a step back because sometimes, things are done just because people have seen it. And like I said, in another game or another environment, and they don't really think about it and, oh yeah, that generates revenue. So just let's use it. So it's really important for UX designers or UX practitioners to explain to people, well, this is working well because this is actually influencing people to do something that's not necessarily to the benefit. And also, what's going to help is a lot of people are not happy about dark patterns today. A lot of people are talking about the attention economy. So that, the external pressure, and I think that's good that the public is putting pressure on companies on that, because that can help saying, well, if people figure that out, we could lose actually revenue because in the long term, using dark patterns might go against you. I say might because sadly, it's not always the case. You see a lot of companies thriving and they're still using dark patterns. But sometimes, it can backfire. So yeah, so take a look if your company has defined company values. Then you can use that and then explain, okay, this is what we do to our users, and this is going against our company values. So how are we going to deal with that? If you're in a company that don't have company values, then it's going to be harder. You can still make the case that, hey, this is defined as a dark pattern. Let me explain to you what it does. Are we sure you want to do that? But it's not always, some people, care more about business and others care more, about a good balance. So if you're in a company that just don't care and they just care about revenues, then it's tough. I hope that helps a little bit.
I collected a few questions from the chat. So the next question is from Irving Robles. I hope I said that right. What do you think about a world like Black Mirror style? Do you think that we're approaching that?
It can. I mean, we've seen that in our history before. I mean, we didn't wait technology to see how manipulating people in propaganda does. So it happened before. It's usually not sustainable in the long term, but that doesn't mean it cannot hurt people in the short and medium term. In many cases, like a capitalist economy is influencing people to just try to make the most money and not necessarily thinking about ethics. So there are things from Black Mirror that can be directly applicable to what's going on. Now, also, people are not robots and they're not idiots. I mean, most of the time we fall for these dark patterns and traps just because we're busy. And also because in our society, we're always busy, there's always stuff that we need to do. And so that's the reason why we don't read the fine prints. And even if some people are very careful, like I'm very careful to not fall for these things, but I'm still falling for these things because sometimes I'm tired and I'm super busy doing a lot of stuff, or I'm stressed out or whatever. But at the end of the day, people are not robots. And when they figure it out, they're not happy. So it's not as easy as it's explained as it's portrayed in Dark Mirror. Black Mirror. But because it's a dystopia, but there are some truth in there. In many ways, we can see these problems in our society. Like even though it's not as straightforward as in Black Mirror, we see the impact of systemic racism, for example, just because it's been there for so long and people have this thing called the in-group bias. They're going to justify hiring, if they're white, they're going to hire a white person more likely than a Black person or a person of color. And they're going to post-rationalize it because, they were the best person for the job and they had the best score at the test or whatever, and they don't necessarily recognize that they are biased just because we are more comfortable with someone who looked like us. And this is a bias that we all have. So this exists and we see already the impact of it. But, people can recognize it at some point. A lot of people now are voicing out their concerns, and we can avoid a catastrophe. I have faith in humanity, hopefully. So we'll see if I'm right.
Cool. Really quick, we see a lot of questions, which is amazing. We will not have time to get to all of them, but we're trying our best. And if you guys have further questions, feel free to continue discussion on the Game UX channel in Design Buddies. We have a whole Game UX community there. So that's a resource for you all to check out as well. And I'll call on the next person who raised her hand, Sarah.
Hi. So my question is about do you have tips for designing games to be more inclusive for people with hearing loss or vision issues? And then what are some good examples of these kind of games you know of?
Sure. So thankfully, accessibility in games is getting more attention. Still a lot of work to do, but it's getting better a little bit. So a lot of people are just using options, so flexibility in the design to address that. So you can have, for example, colorblind, different filter to address people with one of the colorblind blindness. But at the end of the day, what you want to do is think about all these things within the design itself. So for example, why having things that need absolutely to distinguish between colors, where you can also have shape and texture to distinguish between things, or make sure that you don't give signs or feedback only through one channel. So not only through vision or not only through audio, so that you can cater to a lot of people. So this is more the way we need to think about it. Like I said earlier, think about what your design decisions, who is it excluding, and think about a way that it's not excluding people anymore. Then if you didn't figure it out, then you can have different options that people can turn on and off to cater to what they care about or their needs, which is actually good UX in general. And lastly, I would just direct you to the website gameaccessibilityguidelines.com. Was made by Ian Hamilton, that is an advocate in game accessibility, and he created that website to give tips to make games more accessible. And you have tips for that are easy to implement and harder to implement. So I'm going to type it in the chat. Why can I select reply to everyone? That's weird. Yeah, okay.
People sharing it. Sometimes Zoom is like that.
I'm just like tapping it down. Game accessibility guidelines. I hope I'm not making typos. Yeah, so it's just sending it to not sure who actually privately. So why cannot I select everyone? This is weird. I have like a long list of, there you go. Everyone in meeting. Of course, it was at the very top. There you go.
Cool. I know we have 1 minute left, and I really want to respect everyone's time as well. So let's do a group photo. I'll give everyone a few seconds to turn on our camera. I know we have a lot of questions. We couldn't get through them all, but feel free to continue discussion in the Game UX channel and the Design Buddies community, as well, and connect with Celia. And yeah, definitely watch the YouTube for past talks and everything too, to learn more about the topic.
Yeah, there's also a lot of talks from the Game UX Summit or the GDC UX Summit or the Game User Research Summit. So from a lot of different people. It's not just me.
Yeah, a bunch of them on YouTube too. Yeah. All right, I'll count down 10 seconds to take our group photo. And for our group photo, we take a regular one first. So I had to like scroll through to see everybody's photo. And then I'll do a wave. We'll do like a group wave. You can dance, you can wave, you can dab for our Instagram story too. So yeah, I'll count down 5 or 10. Feel free to grab your stuffed animal as well if you want to be included in a photo. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Keep smiling until I say we can dance, because I need to take all the people's all the screens and stuff. So all right, I'm gonna pull up my Instagram story. Feel free to dance, move around, because y'all be on our Instagram story at design.buddies.
I love how you didn't see that, like woo.
Yeah, like because we're all super hype right now, so like it can be really hype and express your hypeness. All right, ready, set, go. Woo! Yeah, we're super hype. All right, let me restart. All right. Right, we're super hype right now. Let's party. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That concludes our event. Make sure to join the discussion in Design Buddies and connect with Celia and watch her talks on YouTube, because she has a lot on there, and read her blog too. And so I'm going to stop streaming on YouTube, and we'll stay a few minutes for a quick debrief, but everybody is free to go right now. So thank you all. Have a nice day. Join Design Buddies and stay safe from